Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Suze.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Occidental Center for the Arts and our virtual book launch series. It's so wonderful to see all your faces from all over. I see someone's from Asheville in North Carolina, from everywhere. Welcome in. My name is Suze Pringle Cohan, and I'm privileged to chair our awesome literary committee at OCA. We're all very happy to welcome you in this afternoon and to our third virtual book launch of our fall season. For over 10 years, our center has been the cultural cornerstone of our community, offering world-class music, dance, theater, written word, and visual arts. We've been here to educate, entertain, and inspire, supporting both local and global artists. And we're continuing to carry on despite COVID. Tina, our executive director, has courageously produced 4 very successful virtual concerts since we were forced to close our doors in March. We've had musician friends from all over the world who have blessed our stage in person over the years, performed via video concerts. We've had virtual art gallery tours, and now 3 virtual book launches. Thank you, our community, for jumping in to help keep us stay afloat. You are the stars. In our new Zoom world, the advantage, of course, of these virtual events is that we're no longer limited geographically. I get to see my sis who's in Santa Ynez and people from the East Coast all over. Normally, those out of town would not be, or out of state, wouldn't be able to come and attend our events in person. And now you can. And locals, you don't have to get dressed up and drive any distance in your car. The downside, of course, is that we can't happily mingle as we're used to doing. But I welcome you to settle in at home in your favorite chair with your favorite beverage or snack, and wave to your neighbors on screen. We're all here together, even if we can't be in person. To this afternoon's event, a very warm welcome to our friend Joan Frank, well-known local author and essayist, with her most recent novel, The Outlook for Earthlings. It's an intimate story of 2 lifelong friends with very opposite natures. Joan will be joined in conversation with Patrick Fanning, himself an author, and happens to be president of OCA's board of directors. Joan and Pat have selected topics of conversation elicited by the novel, and Joan will read sections that illustrate those themes. So just a bit of background on Joan for those of you who may not know her and her incredible biography. She's the author of 10 books of literary fiction and nonfiction. Where You're All Going, 4 novellas, won the 2018 Mary McCarthy Prize for Short Fiction. Try to Get Lost, Essays on Travel and Place, published the same month, won the 2018 River Teeth Literary Nonfiction Prize. A MacDowell, VCCA, and Vermont Studio Center Fellow, Joan's work has received many honors and awards, including the Juniper Prize for the novel and 2 Forward Reviews Book of the Year awards. Joan also reviews literary fiction and nonfiction for the Washington Post. She lives in Santa Rosa. Pat's first career was in publishing. In 1979, he co-founded New Harbinger Publications. His novels, Infidels Abroad, Rejuvenation, and Jeffrey Doover, were all launched at OCA. His second career is in art. He was one of the founders of the Grayton Gallery, paints mostly in watercolor, and has taught watercolor classes in the US and occasionally abroad in Costa Rica and Italy. He often travels with his sketchbook, which resulted in a recent book, Travel Sketching. He's the president of OCA's board of directors and has most recently spearheaded the construction of OCA's new lobby. Here's to the blessed moment when we can all return in person and enjoy both our brand new lobby and all the events inside. A Q&A period will follow Joan and Pat's conversation. To pose a question or make a comment, click on the chat box icon below your screen, and the chat column will appear on your right. Type in your question, and I'll then pose your question to Joan. So you'll be muted throughout, but you'll be able to ask any question or make any comment you'd like. And then it'll be time to buy the book. Joan is kindly donating 20% of all book sales to OCA. You can pay via credit card or PayPal. You'll see the link info in the chat box, or you can simply go to the OCA webpage for the purchase link. Be sure to include your physical address so we can send you the book. And although this event and all our book launches are free, we gratefully welcome any donation to OCA that you might be able to offer at this time. It's been a challenging one. You can either add a donation to your book sale payment or do it as a separate payment. So my job right now is done. I'll return after the presentation to facilitate with the Q&A as it ends the event towards the end. So now, with no more time to waste, I give you Joan Frank with Pat Fanning.
Thanks, Susie. Thanks, Suze, very much. Hi, Pat.
Hi, Joan. Nice to see you again.
And you.
Yes. Well, I've been looking forward to this, and welcome everybody. It's a very fascinating book that goes to a lot of different places, has a lot to say. And I want to get as quickly as we can into some actual excerpts from the book. So I thought I would ask you to read that really funny scene when Scarlett drives on kind of an impromptu car trip, a road trip with a couple of her friends to get married. It's on page 34 that it starts.
I'll do that.
Let you set it up however you like.
All right. Thanks. I want to thank all. I can see a ton of friends on this screen, and I want to thank you all so much for showing up. It's just gorgeous to see your sweet faces. And thank OCA for taking this on. I really wish we could hang out in the same room, but one day. In the meantime, this will have to be the sublimation. Okay, we're setting it up. Scarlett and her shy friend Mel are in the car with Mel's then boyfriend. They're freshmen in high school. They're going to drive to Reno to get married on impulse. They want Scarlett to be a witness, and they want her to play the guitar while they're driving up to Reno from Sacramento. Everyone is young, very innocent. Okay, and Scarlett lives with her father, who is Max. They live just the two of them together. Scarlett did not tell her father about her friend's intention to marry or of driving to Reno. Going out with friends was sufficient to the day. Back tonight sometime, she said in piping tones. Have fun, dear. He flapped down a corner of the IF Stone Weekly, smiled. Max's eyes were still handsome, long-lashed, but around their hazel irises circled a thin milk-white rim. That tiny rim of white dismayed Scarlett, reminding her of television screens whose pictures began to shrink as the tube lost life. Max blinked both eyes once at her now, an eye kiss across the room. Be safe, the universal parent blessing. Scarlett blinked back. The three young people climbed into Ernest's dusty Plymouth, headed north on I-80. Scarlett sat against the side window in back, sprawled her legs the length of the seat, strummed her old Japanese acoustic. She loved the guitar as you might love a pet. Its wood the color of whiskey, gut strings soft and close to the fretwork. Despite its age, it sounded warm. She sang Coconut Grove, Look Through Any Window, You and Me and Rain on the Roof, I Can't See Me Loving Nobody But You, Guantanamera, and The Tracks of My Tears. She sang Hey 98.6, What a Dream I Had Dressed in Organdy, The Water is Wide. These songs, when she sang them or heard them sung, made Scarlett think of getting lost in forests with clear brooks flowing through. Moss lined the water's depths, silver minnows darted. Along the green banks she wandered, watching the water, soon happening into a young man also wandering, smart and gentle, also alone. The young man would at once know her, require her. He would take her by the shoulders, tell her so. He would resemble the actor Alan Bates. Ernest drove, nodding at Scarlett's songs. Mel smiled, nodded. All three looked out the windows, dreaming about their lives so far. In the years that have fallen between that day and the rest of life, rounds of seasons shed like deepening piles of leaves. They may remember the songs Scarlett sang, or not. But uncountable years later, when one of those songs plays, say it is Left Bank's Pretty Ballerina, the skin along their forearms will prickle and an image will fly past a rural street in spring, new grass tender with rain, kids walking home from school, eating candy. To hear those songs years later, worlds later, a feeling comes, a queer mesh of sweetness and dread, a dimple in the belly of half-remembered exaltation and pain. The car's motor pushed them along, up through the Sierras, sleeping dinosaurs, powdered sugar on their backs. Of course, with passing hours, despite Scarlett's music and spurts of chatter, the young people's spirits wilted. When they arrived in Reno, it was dark and cold and wet. They knew no one but themselves, stiff and tired from the drive. They could find only one chapel open, and it happened to be hosting someone else's wedding just then. And on further inquiry, Ernest learned there would be a cash fee, more than he had on him. And it seemed a license was wanted, which in those days still meant getting a health test of some kind, and a number of other bothersome requirements the three had not anticipated. So they found a cheap coffee shop, ate pancakes and patty melts, washed down with translucent coffee, crawled back into the car, swung it onto the interstate, and drove home. Dreaming, tired, they watched the light-pocked hills become flatland streaming past. There would be plenty of time to get married. That's the end of the first part. You all listen so sweetly. I love looking at your faces. It's gorgeous.
Oh, Joan, this is such a rich little scene, and so charming in how you evoke the youthful impulsivity of it all. And one of the things I was really struck by was how deftly you move from a pretty objective third-person point of view into a really deep interior sense of what's going on in Scarlett's mind, and indeed all of them, and even a glimpse of the future. And I just wonder if you could talk about how you do that, if you have a bag of tricks, or if it's more of an instinctual thing when you're writing.
You know, it was completely instinctual, Patrick. I had no blueprint, no plan or map. I think one of the overarching things I wanted to say about the making of this work is that it is a kind, I hope it will be read and experienced as a kind of urgent music that it wants to come out very badly. And it's only my job to let it come through my hands as fast and accurately as possible. I think what also often happens is that I may begin with X or Y's point of view and very quickly segue into a sort of omniscient, deep interior. and that's what you're noticing, which makes me happy because it was pretty much unconscious uh, most of that time. I also wanted to talk about early on now, with regard to the reference to music, the importance of music in the work itself. How, to me, setting. I know you're going to be talking about setting later, Pat, but the music is part of the setting, very much, very elemental, very organic, and in as much as landscapes and objects evoke emotion by virtue of the way we affiliate with them out of our own memories, so then does music become, to me, the consummate drug for evoking emotion. It might as well be a shot we take right into an artery. It works that fast and that powerfully, utterly powerfully. I don't know about my audience, although I have a suspicion that they feel this way or feel similarly, but there are certain pieces of song that can bring you to your knees within seconds, even the first note. And the music figured for me powerfully growing up in those days and those worlds. And I hope that it will act like a sort of lightning rod and convey the power, the emotional power of how we were all thinking and feeling in those years. And I've made no secret of the fact that the novel is very autobiographical. Go
Yeah,
for
I
it, Matt.
can almost hear you singing some of those songs. Yeah. Let's go on to another one of my favorite scenes. This
Okay.
occurs much later in the book and in the relationship of Mel and Scarlett,
Yes.
where they have actually been separated, haven't been in each other's lives for quite some time. And Mel has had some health problems and so on, and Scarlett has gone in many different directions. And so they have a little reunion in Sacramento. And
Correct.
I love where you pick that up on page 30, excuse me, on
Sure.
page 85.
I've got it. Right. Mel has moved back to Sacramento for reasons that are still mysterious to us at that point in the novel. She has called Scarlett, who lives in San Francisco and is a columnist for the Chicago Tribune, among other things. Scarlett has driven to Sacramento and sat down in Mel's tiny cottage um, and confronted her. Okay, now we are going to fill in some gaps. Scarlett leaned forward at the table. Walnut it must be, dented and dark, like a beloved old piano. Upon it, glasses of iced black currant tea, homemade carrot soup, these from Mel. The wheat bagels, organic wine, fake egg salad made of tofu, organic pears, red and green grapes, brick of Gruyere, rye crackers, tub of chive and garlic hummus, diet tonic water, Kalamata olives, small package of baby carrots, organic Fuji apples, fresh squeezed orange juice, whole grain chocolate chipped cookies, raw cashews, salted pistachios, low fat popcorn, menthol cough drops in case throats got sore from talking. These were from Scarlett. In the tiny fridge, a box of organic spinach and bottle of diet root beer. Oh, oh, Mel had put her hands to her cheeks, shaking her head, watching Scarlett unload bag after bag from the car. Why did you bring so much food? Because you never know, Scarlett replied, panting. Abundanza, she added mysteriously, brows beetling as she unpacked groceries. She had driven 2 hours on the interstate, backseat stuffed with bags of food. Fiddled with the radio, watched landscape flow. Beer factory, empty fields, orchards, fruit stands. Then the ugly city, viral stacks of boxes and tubes in the middle of farmland. When she finally arrived to the little town Mel had described, village more like it, hamlet really, Scarlett became uncertain of directions and stopped to phone Mel at a pay phone. In minutes, an aqua tercel pulled into the patch of park shaded by 100-year-old fir, the village centerpiece. Scarlett's own car was a steel gray tercel, Same make exactly, same shape. She'd parked in front of a hardware store. Early spring, windy, cool. Trees waved and nodded, branches shaggy evergreen, tips chartreuse with new growth. From her driver's seat, Scarlett rolled down the window, watching the aqua blue version of her own car pull up. A tall, slim figure emerged. Mel's hair was very short, curly, light brown. She wore dark trousers, a dark sweater, walking matter-of-factly towards Scarlett, who had opened the door and sprung out, waving as if Mel could not see her. They embraced. Scarlett passed her lips across a cool, silken cheek, conscious of a dainty, sweet scent. She hopped back into her own car, followed her new old friend over a bumpy single-lane road to a gravel drive. The drive led to an in-law unit behind a ranch house. Mel's one-room cottage faced the larger home's backyard. Sliding glass doors framed a wide view, bushy, terraced, the long garden giving way to open fields. Wild wheat edged the fence, long stalks with blonde tufts ruffled by the wind. Scarlett studied the yard, the wind-combed wheat. She turned to watch Mel move about her doll's house kitchen, reaching for things. How lovely Mel was. Svelte, graceful, her short curls growing out from the last chemo round. You could not discern anything at all, Scarlett noted, glancing at the outlines of the soft black sweater. Mel had spoken briefly of a reconstruction attempt. One of the few times Scarlett would ever hear her sound bitter. A terrible botch, Mel said. Scarlett pictured a shingle of flesh, perhaps hung crookedly, perhaps no areola, no nipple. She had seen photos of women, a whole calendar full, determined to make the world look at them after mastectomies. All ages, races, defiant, bearing one-breasted chests, flaunting the scar which looked like a railroad track where a breast had been, dark raised welts marking how staples had closed flesh. Sometimes the scar looked like a zipper, sometimes like a toothless mouth, lips sewn tight. Scarlett had heard that balance was affected when a breast was amputated, ability to reach, muscle tissue, lymph glands. Women had to relearn how to use their arms. She knew an industry had developed around this with prosthetics, wigs, scarves. Mel looked serene today. She was enjoying her time now, she said. A blissful reprieve, remission. Scarlett thought Mel looked like a movie star in trousers. Olivia de Havilland, big-boned, tall, yet in her face, her voice, the remembered girl. Same deft containment, same geisha-like self-effacement. It confounded Scarlett. It was archaism. Once admired, she supposed, once even championed, called modesty. There you have it.
Oh, thank you so much. I love how carefully and intimately this is described, how much you notice, especially the hilarious list of food and the,
You know, lists are so fun, Pat. They're so fun that authors have to curb themselves from just giving themselves over completely to lists, because they're sort of, they're both the substance and the container, right? They set a scene, but they also tell you worlds about the characters involved. And I had great fun with that one, just a huge amount of fun. Also, yeah, I wanted to say that in terms of setting, which I know you admired the particulars, the author Henry James once famously advised writers to, quote, be someone on whom nothing is lost. And believe me, if there's one helpful thing about having no skin, it's that all details come roaring at you, like bombarding you as a writer, like cosmic rays. And again, it only falls to transcribe. It only falls to the writer to transcribe that roar of inrushing detail. And all of it means something. completely inanimate objects have numinousness in the world of the writer and in the world of characters relating, and meaning and heft. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. I just think it's almost like magic, that the way that setting and a small detail will illuminate a theme or delineate a character.
Thank you.
And I love to watch you doing it.
Thank you.
I was thinking maybe for our next excerpt, there's a section that starts on page 125.
I have it ready.
Oh, great. And
I'll set it
I'll
up.
let you set this one up. Yeah.
Right. So Scarlett has meantime found herself a very kind husband named Finn, who knows Mel's story quite well and does not at all approve. It's not that he minds that Mel is the mistress of a married man. It's that he minds that she seems to style herself in a very morally high ground way. She could be a character out of Jane Austen. She's that contained and gracious and formal. And he feels that there's an essential dishonesty going on. And Scarlett knows he feels this, and part of her agrees with him, and part of her wants passionately to defend her longtime best friend. And so when when Finn, Scarlett's husband, makes a kind of an ugly face when they're talking about Mel, I'll pick up from here. It was just at this point Scarlett would feel herself tearing in two. She's on a plane flying home from Paris with Mel and Mel's daughter. They've had an expedition together. Scarlett uncrossed a leg, pushed up from both armrests, replanted her bottom. To loathe someone precisely for their goodness, blinkered, archaic, even pathological, was like stoning a gentle animal. How could anyone sustain such a stance? But was it really, at its heart, goodness? Or was it a choice to manifest the best possible facsimile of goodness? And what did that hide? And how honest was such hiding? All of this inarticulable. Mel and Saul is Mel's married lover. Mel and Saul must have recognized one another from the start. Chemicals, biosignals, telegraphed it, moved them toward one another in ancient, primal ways. Scarlett wished to God she could cheer for the Sermon on the Mount. That's what she calls Saul's discourses, Sermon on the Mount. Easy to say, I am glad you are happy. Harder by far, it seemed, to cheer the apparatus of happiness. Mel insisted she was happy. Scarlett didn't buy it. Some fat lie lay coiled like a python in the engine room of that story. From the beginning, Mel endured Saul's vanities, his dogma, his pronouncements, though much of it whipped her bloody. His laying down of absolutes. I don't have affairs, I have relationships. On and on he talked about how he loved his wife, the golden angel Winnie, never dreaming it might pain the mistress at his knee every Saturday, who smiled whilst his words stabbed her in the head over and over. Smiled as she bade him goodbye, softly shutting the door. Then the smile fell off. Scarlett knew this from years of email before Mel stopped reporting. Once Mel had actually slipped into a clarinet concert of Winnie's, come home and wept. She would never allow him to know. Saul had everything: authority, wisdom, money, devoted slave wife, adoring female students, perfect control. Except, Mel said, his grown children were having trouble, stumbling in the world. Surprise, surprise, thought Scarlett bitterly. Saul's response to his children's trouble, according to Mel, was characteristic. He would swoop in on them, drove up to their homes unannounced, Winnie alongside him in the car like Robin to his Batman, squared off theatrically with his kids and their spouses, confronting them with some sort of moral reprimand or ultimatum, until someone fled the room in anger or tears. Then he took his wife by the arm and drove off, head erect. Or he withheld his visits, a royal withdrawal. Wrote long letters instead, detailing his philosophy of life in many single-spaced pages. His wife's responses to the children's distress? Saul does not say. Winifred Armentino, from what Mel had gathered, was reared in North Dakota. Lines of demarcation were clear. Husband king, head never higher than his, Mel had once murmured, a line from The King and I, making Scarlett laugh at the time.
I really love the phrase that you used to open up this scene. I'm quoting, to loathe someone precisely for their goodness. And it seems to me that in the quadrangle that you're discussing here, the Mel, Scarlett, Saul, Winnie interactions, they're all basically good persons, but at the same time, they're occasionally quite loathsome from a different point of view. And
yeah, that may be so, Patrick. I think, though, in the case of Mel, her behavior is so self-conscious and so careful and so self-effacing that it renders her a kind of saint. And saintliness is very hard to live with in the day-to-day, very hard. And it makes the best friend of the saint feel fairly badly corrupt by comparison. And so Scarlett is saddled with her own resistance to what she believes is fundamentally dishonest, which is her friends camouflaging her true fine mind and sophisticated nature, and her wish to support her friend. A friend wrote me about this novel, understanding it perfectly, that Scarlett betrays her friend if she stays silent, and she betrays her friend if she cries out. And it's a hell of a hamstring to be slung in. It's just a real problem that not even a therapist can solve. I wanted also to say about the character of Mel, because I've been thinking about this quite a bit, is that everyone watching is probably familiar with Death of a Salesman and the late Willie Loman's wife's entreaty that attention must be paid. I think one of the most urgent, overarching, most powerful thrust behind this novel is to get attention paid to the undersung, the obscure, the self-abnegating, the invisible. I was thinking today about it, and I was wondering to myself, when Willie Loman's wife said that, I wonder how much attention is enough. And I also wonder what kind. I am drawn to fiction that, in effect, it could be argued that all literary fiction is trying to get attention paid to something that would otherwise not be seen or attended. And by attended, I mean at the soul level. So I'm still pondering that. How much attention must be paid and what kind?
Right. Toward the end of the novel, there's kind of a coda piece I think would tie right into that on page 125 when Scarlett is kind of dwelling on everything that has happened and what her daily life is now.
Right. This is post-Mel, and Scarlett's living with her husband, and life goes on. Every so often, Scarlett will go out the back stairs and look up at the stars, which have not changed since the loss of her friend, which astonishes her. And she'll weep for a while and come back in and resume life. And I think the great astonishment here, and for all of us who've lost people, I know, is the way life resumes. Again, a matter of wondering when attention stops being paid, what do we owe the dead? You know, what do we owe them? And also, how much time have we ourselves got left? And how should we carry on within that given precious time? So here's a typical evening. Some nights, Scarlett would stare at the dishes in the sink, Finn could be taking his last breath right now. She would rush into the living room where he lay sprawled on the couch, attentive to basketball. Aware of her approach, without taking his eyes from the game, Finn would shift his legs to make room for her, lift an arm and draw her close, one easy motion so she could nestle beside him. The practiced instinct of the enclosing arm, the familiar custard scent as she burrowed her nose under his chin, made her eyes fill, her throat close. But always, in a minute or two, the tears waned, her throat opened again. If Finn were engrossed in the game and she had stayed quiet against his shoulder, he would never know the spasm had passed through her. And she would be glad, because when he did catch her eyes filling, he teased her, faked his own death, went limp, bugged his eyes sightlessly upward. She would laugh and push at him, angry, frightened, amused, ashamed. Soon she would grow bored of watching the screen with him. Urgency gave way, as it must, to the daily. Dostoevsky, released the last moment by the firing squad, had to walk away, decide what to do next. Toilet scrubbing, aging skin, whimsical sounds of intestines. No neat framing of these, as in movies, books. No beginnings, no ends, except the obvious ones, when we stood by, helpless. And even if you kept aware to the near last, as Mel had, even when you knew it was ending any minute, time remained pointedly, stubbornly itself. Saul could not make the boombox work in Mel's last room. Sewage stank. Bees danced among the yellow weeds. Wind chimes stirred. Car bombs exploded in Jerusalem. With all the passion in the world, you couldn't make it be something else, something other. The colors of meaning, the shapes of loss, only deepened and clarified with time. Time had to pass, new experience to distract you, to give you any sense of what had gone before. Mel had known all sides of it. She would honor any case Scarlett made. Mel knew the seesaw, engagement or withdrawal, or perhaps worst, the Sisyphean stuckness, the agitation in between. Mel understood stuckness. Mel, who spent her last months making the same rounds, parents, step-parents, deluded sister, lonely, puzzled brother. Scarlett had asked why, her chair pulled close to the bedside. It was to be the last time they spoke. Why had Mel felt she had to make these rounds? Because they are there, Mel answered firmly, eyes open, yellow skin taut. Had Mel meant there was simply no escaping family? That she dwelt too geographically near to pretend she could not visit? Or had she meant the sheer existence of those people commands I attend them? It was both. It was the latter. It was more the latter. Thanks, Patrick.
Oh, thank you, Joan. I particularly like how you don't go for the Hollywood ending. You actually don't let your characters walk off into the sunset over with the music over, but follow them into the next day and the next day and realize that they still have to get up every morning and answer that question, how then should we live on?
Exactly right.
Yeah. I noticed that we're getting on to 45 minutes and we're starting to get some questions accumulating in the chat room. So this would be a good time for people to start typing in their questions. And perhaps we should turn it back to our participants and see what they want to know.
Sure. Suze, are you going to read the questions? Wherever you are? You're muted, Suze.
Take off your mute, Suze, and
I'm now unmuted.
Okay.
And taking a look at the questions and incredible comments. The first one was from Jennifer Haupt.
Yes. Hi, Jennifer. So
The
glad you're
prose
here.
is so beautiful. I'm wondering how long it took to write this book and what Joan's writing day looks like.
Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. Everybody, Jennifer edited an anthology of essays about living in the time of COVID called Alone Together. It's a terrific collection. I encourage everybody to get it. She broke her behind making that book. It took about a year to write this, Jennifer, following immediately on the death of my beloved then best friend. And it came tumbling out in a molten way. It couldn't have been much more urgent. Again, in that overdrive of attention must be paid. One novel I like to compare this one with, which is immodest of me, but in principle, is Stoner by the late John Williams, which I encourage everyone to read, which charts the path of an unremarkable, obscure, quiet, self-effacing professor. And it's one of the most extraordinary documents of ascribing meaning to life that any of us could ever read. It took about a year, and it took a long time thereafter to find a home for it. The writing day for me involves getting out to, there's a little studio behind our house, which used to be a carport for a jalopy, I believe. Our house is in 1930s, and those days were jalopy days, I think. It's been converted into a little studio for me, and lined with books, very comforting views of the Japanese maple tree I love, and some flowers that my husband planted. And I go out there and deliberately always tell myself that I can do anything I want, including write letters to adored friends, and then sort of sneak sideways into one of several projects. And that way, there's no performance anxiety. The concurrent law of the writing day is I have perfect freedom and permission to make a big mess, the biggest mess possible, and no one is going to see it until I decide it's ready to be seen. And in that way, I try to take all strictures off, all performance anxiety away, be completely free to make as big a mess I can, and then start shaping it, mixing metaphors like clay, warm clay. And I go out and noodle, and then I obsessively comb and recomb over what has been noodled until something shapely, heaven hopes, begins to emerge. And that goes on day after day after day. My husband is a sort of semi-saint himself, because he knows that I'm happiest out there. And he's sometimes had to dynamite blast me out of there, and threaten and cajole and all kinds of other tricks to get me out of there. But I'm not sorry for a moment of it. And when books like this hit hearts like yours, I'm made very happy indeed. That's what Tim O'Brien, the writer, said he made work to do, to hit hearts. I think that describes it very well. Thanks, Jennifer. Hope to meet when we can all meet again.
So sort of connected to this is a question from Pat. When you include autobiographical details in your novel, do you learn new things about yourself?
Oh, I suppose, of course, yes. Certainly unpleasant things sometimes as well. And I guess one of the great freedoms of literary fiction is getting it all out there without regard to some law of vanity. You're going to make it as raw as it can be, almost as if you were responding to a dare. Truth or dare. Isn't that the name of the game? You must get the truth spoken. And again, the joy of literary fiction is that 9 times out of 10, people will say to you, "Oh, you how did you know how I felt? How did you know that was a way I was feeling?" As if it had been locked up in them, and suddenly someone was tapping on the safe door, releasing their secret. That's another joy of literary fiction as well.
Oh, thank you, Joan. Another question now comes from Susan Reinhardt from Asheville. As someone from Asheville, I'd like to know if you grew as a novelist in the Warren Wilson MFA program. Your
I
writing
did.
is
I
glorious.
did. Hi, Susan. I am a Wally. I'm a proud card-carrying Wally, and I've got Wallies watching tonight. It was a feast. I wasn't sure whether to go. This was many more years ago than I care to admit, but it was a feast, and the friendships and the relationships and the support network are unparalleled. They last over many years and deepen and get richer and richer. And a lot of my former instructors were always working writers, continue to make work. A lot of my co-alum
Yeah.
are making beautiful work. And it was a joy. It was a joy. It was a very precious, sacred time away from life and commerce, simply to think very hard about making work and to look very, very closely at work. That's one thing it taught us to do, to really break it down. And
That's great. Thank you.
oh yeah, so
I
glad.
think one of I loved your work, by the way. I can't wait to read the entire manuscript or novel now. A writer that I admire a lot is Ron Rash.
Yes, I know Ron. I don't know him personally, but I know of him, and everybody, a lot of people love him,
Yeah.
especially in your area.
Right. I didn't know if he was faculty or not. I haven't looked into it.
He may have been. Gee, it's lovely hearing that North Carolina accent.
Thank you. It's really Georgia. I've only been there 30 years
Well,
in Asheville.
okay. It's musical.
Thanks.
Sure.
I now have a question from Sharon Olson and William Sumner.
Hi,
When-
you guys.
When you start a book, do you always know how it will end, or is the ending sometimes a surprise to you?
That's a lovely question. And I don't always know. I do not always know. Once I knew the end before I got too far into it, and I went ahead and wrote it and then filled in the flesh all the way to the end. But that was only once. The rest of the time, mostly no. And except in the case of, well, even in this case, I wasn't sure where it was going to land. And I think that's one of the great risks and joys and terrors and mysteries of writing fiction. It might be you will not know, and you have to trust something. It almost sounds superstitious. You have to trust something that it will come to land in a place that tells you this is it. This is it. Sometimes you'll go a little too far and then you'll realize, nope, that's too far. Cut that off, cut it away, and let it stand here. And that's a very blessed moment. You just want to fall to your knees and thank all the gods, because it's so important. It's as important as anything, as first lines and as titles. Titles are terribly important to me. I have a ruthless, arrogant snobbery about titles. Very mean and nasty.
Bravo on this side.
Pardon?
Oh,
Anyway, thank you guys. Thank you, Sharon and Bill, for being there. I love seeing you.
it's wonderful. Thank you for the reading.
Got the book,
Yeah,
everything.
right.
Thank you so much.
Really happy. And one last thing, IF Stone's Weekly was mentioned earlier in the program. As an old-time subscriber, I'm glad to see that piece of the culture.
I knew you'd
So
know.
vibrant.
I knew you'd know. It's an old lefty rag.
Yeah, it was really good.
Okay, what else do I need to talk?
All right. This is from Jeannie
Durier. I love Jeannie.
Your poetic words come to life by your melodious voice.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Have some of your books as audiobooks read by you.
Oh, I would love to do that. And you're not the first to ask, sweetheart. Thank you for asking. Apparently, the audio thing is a kind of a mean obstacle course. You have to be approached by them, and they generally approach people who've trained to read, even if the author, him or herself, has a terrific reading voice. I've contacted one friend about it, and she gave me a list of requirements and difficulties that made it sound almost impossible. So unless you get very famous, I think you can't read your own stuff. You have to be approached. And then they have to negotiate with your publisher about what fee they'll pay and all kinds of rights and stuff. So I've just let it go. But I love at least reading to bookstore audiences and Zoom audiences. So thank you for that, Janie.
And I second that. You have the most wonderful
Thank you.
in your work.
Thank you, Suze.
Bring
Thank
it to life. It's just a question now, another one from Pat. Do you have a new fiction project in the works?
I do, and I'm glad you asked that. I think I'm working on 3 more novellas,
Oh,
and it's been a bit weird during the time of COVID because I for a while there kind of fell in and out of the effectiveness of making any fiction during time of COVID. Nothing seemed able to outstrip the bad sci-fi reality we've all been enduring. But slowly, I'm getting a sense that it will come around again when we're all reading again. And heaven knows, reading is saving me right now in the midst of all of it.
yeah.
So, and I also wanted to tell you along those lines who I'm reading. But first, I'll also tell you, Pat, I'm working on a collection of essays mainly for writers, but for anyone interested, about reflections late in the game. In other words, reflections on late work. And I'm kind of excited about it. So stay tuned for more bulletins from that venue. I wanted to tell you all a few names that I read in case you want a couple heavy hints. I think that Marilyn Robinson and Colin Toybeen are 2 of the most brilliant writers living and working today. I love the late William Maxwell, and I love both Agees, the late James and the living Joel, who is James Agee's son. Joel particularly has a memoir called 12 Years about growing up in the once German Democratic Republic, which is one of the most powerful books you'll ever read. Beautiful, beautiful writing. Joel is a skilled translator of German. I love Laurie Colwin, deceased now, a wonderful, wonderful writer of novels brimming with life and a very deep human understanding of love. I love, of course, James Baldwin. I love all the Russians. I love Teju Cole, who has written an auto-fiction called Open City. I recommend him powerfully. I love Ta-Nehisi Coates, whom you all know about, of course. And I love Paul Harding's first novel called Tinkers. And one reason I love it, not just because it's brilliant and stabs you through the heart with its beauty, but that poor Paul Harding couldn't find a publisher for it for the longest time.
Wow.
Finally, I think Coffee House took it on. And then he got famous for it. And let me just assure you how much I love those success stories. I love Carson McCullers. I love Rachel Cusk, who is a bit chilly, but frighteningly brilliant. And I love Nicole Krauss, whom I've come to late by being caused to review her for the Washington Post. She has a new collection out called To Be a Man. And I would read everything, if I were you, that she's written. Being in her mind is bracing. It is like breathing the sweetest, most alpine air. Can't recommend her more powerfully.
Thank you. Oh, what a treasure trove. I'm madly writing this all down. I'd love it if you'd make a list. And
I actually have a 4-page single space list that I will gladly email anybody if they want it.
Okay, me.
Yeah, I see you, Anne. Hi, Anne.
One last question, because you spoke about it so forcefully. How did you arrive at the title for this book? And
that was very, very hard. It was very hard. And it took me a long time. I had named it many things and they each dropped away like layers of chrysalis. initially it was Scarlett and Melanie, because I thought that was the purest and truest. But that didn't seem to have any verve, and it didn't prick uh, human energy or attention. So I let that go away. And then I thought about someone's last room, the room in which a person leaves this world. And I thought that might make a compelling title. But I feared it was too Mel's last room, too sad. And I didn't want people to be turned away at the outset from what otherwise was not just sad. Um, and so I looked and looked through the prose. Usually a title is buried somewhere in the prose. You just have to have your Geiger counter turned on to locate the phrase. And finally I found it when Scarlett is reflecting on how she feels not only she has failed Mel, but that the world and the people in it have failed Mel, that Mel is forced to leave this world, having been disappointed by it and by the outlook for Earthlings, which in some, Scarlett understood, was not good. And that was one of the realities that has to be taken for what it is in the course of this work. And this gives me a chance to plug the idea that runs through a lot of my work, and I hope you'll feel in this novel, of a kind of, you watch my hands, trajectory, a quality of inevitability about the trajectories of human lives. And even when that life ends sadly or badly, which most of ours do and will, how there's nonetheless a radiance emanating from most of our lives, even those who are obscure and unsung, underacknowledged, because of the effortfulness of our having been there and tried. I hope that makes sense. The poet Elizabeth Bishop loved a Brazilian woman named Lota Soares, and their love was doomed and damned and difficult and horrendous and a nightmare. And in the end, Suarez took her own life. But in a novel by a dear friend called The More I Owe You, Michael Sledge is his name, he blurbed this novel for me. In the course of reading about that love, there's this queer radiance that begins to emanate from it. And you understand that the passion of having lived has to have been its own justification in the end. And I hope that that comes through with the passion here of female friendship and an effort to demonstrate love for the other. I've lost enough people in my own life now to know that after the broken glass and trash is swept up, all that's left in our memories and to dedicate ourselves to is the love that we remember between people. And I'm hoping that that is what will reside in people's bodies after reading this novel and make them look at the world and the way we are with each other in that way. The love is what is remembered. Yeah. Maybe that's a good place to close, Suze.
Love abides. Love abides. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
wonder, Suze, if you could remind people how to buy a copy of the book.
Yes.
before we lose anyone.
I believe that Tina was going to put the link in the chat box, but the best way, easiest way to do it is to go to the webpage, the OCA webpage, and there's a link to purchase right there at Joan's, the webpage of Joan's event within the OCA website. And now and go look right there. It's on in the chat box at the very bottom. To purchase book, use link above. So you can do it both ways.
I want to thank everybody who showed up, and Patrick, you were so kind. Suze, you're so helpful. It's lovely to see all the faces of friends I haven't seen for some time anyway. Hi, Scott. I'm looking at you. And Penny, hello. John Phillip, hello. So happy to be able to talk about this with people who listen so well, which is truly itself a lovely art. I appreciate it deeply. Thanks for letting me do this.
Oh, our honor. Thank you so much, Joan.
Thank you.